1947, he knew better. So he says, you're lying to me, I'm going to cut your budgets. And I'm going to regain control over this whole thing. So now we find that on November the 12th, less than a month before he was killed in Dallas, he issues this directive to the Director of Central Intelligence, a review of all UFO intelligence files. He said, as I discussed with you previously, I've initiated and have instructed James Webb, who at that time was head of NASA, to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar exploration. And it would be very helpful if you would have the high threat cases reviewed for the purpose of identification of bona fide as opposed to classified CIA and UFO sources. It's important that we make a clear distinction between the knowns and the unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering of their defense and space programs. Now, number one, 1963, and Kennedy was going to have joint space exploration, and he demands all the UFO files out of the CIA. He would have made it public. He was shaking it all up. And this same document that I retrieved out of the Kennedy Library shows that he has sent a memorandum to James Webb, the administrator for NASA, and he says, basically he's telling him to cooperate with the Soviet joint space exploration. Now in 1963, most of y'all don't remember 1963, but you remember the Reagan years, the evil empire. We were still in a Cold War in the 1980s. Kennedy was trying to end it. And he was going into joint space exploration. That should have been a huge story, but nobody ever get told about this, okay? And by the way, all this has been totally confirmed by Nikita Khrushchev's son, who said, yes, he knew all about this. They were getting ready to go and end the Cold War. And if they had turned over UFO information to the White House, it would have leaked, it would have all come out. But before the month was out, Kennedy was shot in the head.
Covering up LBJ's scowling face there with that article?
Yeah, that's a great picture. LBJ's looking at him like, your time is coming. Okay, this is an interesting sidelight. In the mid-50s, 1954, this was 3 years before the Soviets put Sputnik in orbit. It was announced in the New York Times and various other publications. I couldn't believe this when I was researching for my book, Alien Agenda, so I went and looked it all up. It was in Time, Newsweek. They said they had just discovered 2 giant satellites orbiting the Earth at the equator. One of them was 600 miles out, one of them was 800 miles out, and they were traveling about 18,000 miles an hour. And they got the famous astronomer, Clyde Tombaugh, to set up a satellite watch system. They wanted, and they was while they were publicizing this, they wanted everybody in the world to set up their telescopes and help them spot these 2 satellites that were revolving around the Earth. And then some scientists were theorizing that they could use them as a stepping stone to the moon. In other words, they launch a rocket, they land on the first satellite, launch a rocket, land on the second one, and then use that one to go on out into space and go to the moon, okay? And then all reports on this stop because they went away. Think about it, folks. What naturally could come into orbit around the Earth and then go away? It was all there, but you don't get told about this, so it didn't happen. Dropped in the old memory hole. Then we have, on December the 9th, 1949, a Japanese astronomer looked through his telescope and what appeared to be a giant explosion took place on Mars. The blast was followed by a luminescent cloud estimated 40 miles high. Now, what was that all about? That was all about because, again, it was reported that right after we had set off the nuclear bombs in Japan, they got the bright idea of maybe we could tell what other worlds are like by shooting a nuclear bomb up to Mars and setting it off, and then we could study the cloud formations and the dust and everything else. And there's no hard evidence to show that this happened, but you've got this astronomer who saw this giant explosion in 1949, and could this be one reason that the ETs came around? You know, what would you do if your neighbors started shooting you know, RPG rockets into your front yard. You go over to find out what was up, right? What are you doing? And this is, I think, in this theory, this is what happened when we set off the first atomic explosions, because when you set off a nuclear explosion, you're tampering with the basic molecular structure of the universe, and it goes far beyond just the immediate area of the blast. You got energy perturbations that go out through the entire universe. And I think somewhere somebody said, holy crap, the kids found the matches. And they came to find out what was going on, because 1946 you had the fireballs over Sweden, 1947 you got the Roswell crash, plus a spate of flying saucer stuff, and it continued unabated. By the way, just something else too, and this is a semi-theory. The facts are correct, but my conclusion, I'll have to admit, is just based on common sense. About 1952, the Air Force issued directives to shoot down any UFO. If you see them, shoot them. And over the next year, there was a huge spate of airline crashes. They were just dropping out of the sky. You can go back and check the record. And then the Air Force backed off and sent out a new directive and said, if you see a UFO, track it, follow it, but don't shoot at it. And the airline crashes stopped.
Yep.
Were we in a little subtle war with them? And did they let us know that, hey, you shoot at us, we can take care of you? Interesting.
Very.
Abductions. Cattle mutilations. With cattle mutilations, the human abduction thing we'll save for later. There are literally thousands of people who claim that they've been abducted by aliens, and they all can't be nuts. Dr. John Mack we'll just look at him, unfortunately got killed, run over by a driver in England. And by the way, for you conspiracy-minded people, I looked into that quite carefully, and I think it was truly an accident. Because the guy that hit Mack stopped, tried to give him aid, and let me tell you something, I almost got run over in England too. Because they drive on the wrong side of the road. And you go up there and you look and you don't see anybody, so you start to walk across and they're coming this way at you, okay? So, but it was very unfortunate, because Dr. John Mack was a very distinguished Harvard academic, and who made a very, very thorough study and concluded, based on all of his work, that these abductions were real, and that the only logical explanation was that these people had had face-to-face experiences with extraterrestrials. He got in trouble for this, of course. And they had a peer review there at Harvard, and everybody was going, oh my gosh, he's going to get kicked out. They went back and they said, we're not even going to rule on what he's talking about aliens or whatever. We're simply looking at his methodology. And what the peer review panel came to was that his methodology was solid. Well, that's about as close as you can come to saying, yeah, he's right. And it's unfortunate that we lost this thing. Cattle mutilations. Going back to the time I worked at the Star Telegram, we were having cattle mutilations all around here. And folks, they're still happening today. Still going on, but you don't read about it because the paper doesn't report on it. Typical deal. Well, yeah, it happened, but hey, that's old news. Well, who's behind it? We don't know. Well, then we don't want to run the story. And here just shows the years they've happened all over the United States, and actually all over the world. They cover many countries, many years, surgical precision, only at night. And I talked to Gabe Valdez, and he says it's hard to believe that predators can pull a steer's heart out through a small hole in its neck. And I've seen that. I went to the one and only cattle mutilation conference in New Mexico back about 1979. And this place was packed with ranchers, farmers, law enforcement people from all around the country. And they were dead serious. They wanted to know what was going on. And a guy named Rommel, an FBI official, gets up before anything can be said and says, gentlemen, I'd like to tell you that we asked you not to say anything that might be used in a future court case. Well, of course, if they catch somebody, they got everything they know. And so they all admitted, they said, we've been muzzled. And that was the end of that. So they keep the lid on, and they don't tell you about all this.